So today what I want to do is talk to you about the freedom of speech and Muslims in France, particularly in light of recent incidents. So what we saw is that last month in October, an 18-year-old Chechen refugee beheaded a history teacher in France. And the question, of course, is why? Uh, what had happened was that the teacher had discussed with his class caricatures of the Prophet Muhammad printed by Charlie Hebdo, which is a French publication known for its irreverent satire. And the teacher was actually showing the cartoons in the context of discussing the freedom of speech within his class. Despite this, the group behind the killing felt that they really were avenging the Prophet Muhammad for this slander. And that leaves us with the question, what should France do? This has been a raging debate since the events. Many news media are scared to print these cartoons, and yet the argument in France is that why should we change our culture of freedom of speech because of these threats? Now, it's true that Charlie Hebdo has also published insulting cartoons of the Catholic Church, many others, and it has been sued multiple times for it. But when they publish these cartoons insulting Islam, people have been killed, including several years ago. So this raises the fundamental question we need to ask: to what extent do we protect free speech? And to what extent should we hinder hate speech? Now, it's important to put this into context. Now, in the US, we can only take action if someone is inciting imminent lawless action. This means that freedom of speech in the US is protected at a very high level. Hate speech is protected. However, in France, the law is far more complex. Under a criminal provision from 2014 known as the Apology for Terrorism, France can pursue anyone who speaks positively about a terrorist attack or a terrorist act or a terrorist group, even if the intention of that individual is not to incite violence, if they're not even supporting violence. In fact, many minors, high school kids, have been investigated under this provision for obnoxious and provocative speech. Now, on top of that, when boycott, divestment, and sanctions activists placed anti-Israel stickers on vegetables in a supermarket, which seems very different, they were charged with hate speech. So support of terrorism is not allowed because under the Apology for Terrorism, it's inciting violence. Placing anti-Israel stickers on vegetables is also not allowed because you're charged with hate speech. But it's notable that this criminalization of speech is clearly related to anything related to support for radical Islam, even when the speaker doesn't actually really, support the activity. And this clearly contradicts the strong line that France is now taking with regard to the Charlie Hebdo cartoons that were insulting Islam. Cartoons that are insulting Islam are protected by free speech laws. They're not covered by hate speech. So what happens here is that France's uneven application of the law is drawing charges of hypocrisy. And inside of this inconsistency, there is danger, because protecting cartoons about the prophet under freedom of speech, but not protecting statements because they appear to approve of extremism or stickers, smacks of discrimination, and it inflames tensions. And people would like to simplify this problem into, yes, the French should make offensive cartoons whenever they want, or no, it should be illegal to make such cartoons. But we need to think about this more deeply. We need to move away from criminalization of statements and cartoons and towards a more comprehensive approach of discussing freedom of speech and respect for identities, both identities, host and adopted group. So the problem is on two fronts today. In the name of free speech, society is accepting a higher level of slander, hate speech, and violent speech. Some of this is spreading in the form of conspiracy theories that are supported by the sheer volume of retweets. In the name of fake religious nationalism, on the other hand, so-called Muslim individuals are launching into terrorist activities to strike fear into populations, bullying them into obeying a rule of law that doesn't permit freedom. So first, on the issue of free speech, we need to protect the freedoms and rights that make democracies who they are. The reason many people immigrate to Europe and the US is because these freedoms have created the foundation for successful and stable societies. And in authoritarian countries, such as in most of the Muslim world, legal avenues of dissent are actually not available. As a result, rebellion usually takes the form of violent unrest and terrorist action. Individuals of extreme ideologies, such as those who subscribe to the idea of Muslim law as a replacement for French law, really need to be educated first and foremost, especially about division of religion and state. And immigrants need to be integrated both economically and socially, with an emphasis on education of children and especially girls. And all communities need to be instructed that any disagreement has to be undertaken with legal action, not violent action. We need to train new immigrants that the national identity of France and other Western countries is not violent, it is legal. Of cartoons, we would not allow disrespectful cartoons of women drawn by men in the mainstream media. We have determined that disrespect of Blacks is not appropriate by other races. Especially this year, we have seen that. We know the damaging effects of this. So why do we believe that religion deserves less respect than race and gender? These are cultural norms at play, not legal ones. In France, it is the abuse of the freedom of speech that has led to hurtful cartoons. This has led to extreme violence, which is illegal. These cartoons aren't directly inciting violence, so they're still legal, they're protected. So what are the solutions? How do we address this? We need to admit that there's been a disintegration of rational dialogue in recent years, increasing a threat to everyone. You can see it in the rise of groups like QAnon and far-right groups. So we need to uphold the freedom of speech, undertake national programs explaining the value of this and how it's a part of national identities that newcomers should adopt, and how law is the avenue to dissent. And at the same time, countries, companies, religious bodies, and the media need to be more responsible in their use of language, transmission of ideas, and respect for others. So I think with that, we may have a chance at dealing with this really complex issue. So with that, thank you so much.